Hello there. The lefty luvvies will now have another reason for a meltdown, as yet another EU member state goes all far right on them. Oh, and there are interesting EU treaty changes in the offing. Germany is about to embark on a programme of large-scale deportations of irregular migrants. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has admitted that too many people are coming into the country illegally, reports Breitbart. And so he's preparing to start deportations on a large scale. Too many people are coming, Scholz told Der Spiegel magazine. We must finally deport on a large scale those who have no right to stay in Germany. And immigration data that came out last weekend showed that in September alone, 21,366 illegal immigrants made their way into Germany. In the first 9 months of the year, Germany saw 92,119 illegal immigrants. Those are the ones that got found, by the way, and they got into Germany. Something that paves the way for the 2016 record of 112,000 to be surpassed. Now, Scholz and his government partners, the Greens, have opposed clamping down on immigration before, but now he's claiming they will stand together in doing so. And he's now making it clear that those who do not need protection as an asylum seeker must be deported. And to get it done, he wants deportations to work 24/7. Our public authorities must be reachable around the clock so that someone can actually be deported when the federal police take them into custody. I wonder if the open borders human rights lawyers in Germany will also be working around the clock to stop him. Then there's the ECHR judges to factor in too. Scholz went on to say, procedures must be accelerated, with asylum applications and initial interviews taking place in the initial reception facility. Court proceedings must also speed up. In some states, initial rulings in deportation cases come after 4 months, while in others it takes 39 months. That is unacceptable. We have to deport people more often and faster. Has he gone and joined UKIP or something? Had this been a UK politician even hinting at something like this, it would have been decried across the lefty press. You know, the BBC, before the statement ended. But Scholz's claims that his partners in government, the Greens, will stand with him on this might not be well founded, because one Green MP, Jamila Schaefer, said, "We shouldn't make out that the solution to migration lies with deportations. Most people can't be deported because they come from war zones like Ukraine, Syria or Afghanistan." And the party that is on the rise, due to feelings amongst many Germans that immigration has gone too far, is the AfD, the Alternative for Germany. And they called Scholz's policies mere gesture politics, because it does nothing to address the core reasons of irregular migration. And gesture it might be, because someone in a newspaper comments section claimed that the German government's draft bill only predicted a rise from 12,000 a year to 12,600 a year of deportations. Now, interestingly, a new party has been formed in Germany, a left-wing party, that many believe will snatch votes from the right-of-centre AfD. And that sounds counterintuitive, but a prominent and veteran left-wing German politician, Sarah Wagenknecht, has started a new party called the Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance. And what might make this party an attractive proposition is that she offers left-wing economic and social policy coupled with a restrictive approach to migration. She is also not a net zero zealot and opposes sanctions on Russia. And she said that many people don't know any more what they should vote for, or vote for the right out of anger and desperation. Anyway, all this newfound border control stuff from Germany comes a few days after France said it would be deporting illegal immigrants before their appeals cases are heard by the ECHR. Now that's breaking that so-called international law, and flouts the Council of Europe's ECHR judges. Things are getting tasty within the European Union. While a few days ago, Sweden declared that it would be limiting social benefits for non-European immigrants, one of the big magnets that draws so many to that Scandinavian country. And today we learn that Sweden is set to make it mandatory for all public services to report illegal immigrants to the police and the Swedish Migration Agency when they come into contact with them, with the Swedish Migration Minister saying, "The proposal for mandatory reporting of illegals in the public sector can counteract the shadow society." Shadow society. Isn't that what multiculturalism is all about? How things have changed in Sweden. Just look at what the Swedish people were presented with from the charity Individual Human Help in 2016. You might remember it. And as it was in Swedish, for those that are just listening, I'll read out what the translation says. "There is no way back. Sweden will never be what it once was. Europe is changing. Sweden needs to be a safe space for refugees. Now we must look forward and find a way to live side by side. It's time to realise that the new Swedes will claim their space and bring their culture, language and habits. It's time to see this as a positive force. To be Swedish must be more than skin colour and place of birth. It must be you, me and everyone together. It's not only the new Swedes that need to integrate, but the old Swedes have to integrate as well. Integration is about finding mutual understanding. Let's create a future that is based on equal parts, reality and belief in the future. Let's build a country where we put hate and fear aside. It's time to create a country together that is proud, inclusive and sustainable. Something new. The new country." And that was meant to be the start of a new Sweden, a new Europe and a new world. Whatever happened for that to turn so sour? Now, however laudable that sounds to some, the hard truth is that such a policy would mean massive changes in laws and social mores. But not just once, but on a continual basis as the demographics change so fast. And that does not make a country a stable place to be. It would only stabilise once everyone on the planet had the same beliefs and habits. And maybe that was, or is, the aim. Scramble everything and everyone about until no one has a heritage or a history they can claim as their own, where no one has a unique identity, making the majority much more docile and easy to control. Anyway, something appears to have caused this all to start coming apart at the seams, and that something is that reality is starting to hit home. And last month Italy decided to charge asylum seekers nearly €5,000 to avoid being detained whilst their claims were being assessed. Try suggesting doing anything like this in the UK and just you watch the open borders lefty luvvies wail and blub. But within the EU, fewer and fewer people are listening to the lefty luvvies dictating to them what they have to think about migration. More and more people are waking up to the close-minded woke rubbish. They see their countries go more broke as they go more woke, and they're fed up with paying the bills. And this message has, at last, percolated through to the governments. Everybody's now admitting that the woke emperor indeed has no clothes. Pity that the UK is out of step with this general consensus due to having a con-socialist government that is more like the old EU than it is a UK-backing Tory party. And in the wings we have a full-on socialist party in the form of Keir Starmer's Labour Party, ready to drag the country ruinously to the left. I'm always amazed at the capacity for the UK electorate to punish itself instead of voting for what it truly believes in. We always end up flip-flopping, red to blue, to red, to blue and back again, however much damage each of them wreaks upon us. Anyway, the EU could well end up being the ones that help us deal with our irregular migration problem, but not by design, but by default, as they change their immigration systems, because they are recognising that the current EU border system is not working. And more on that in a minute. But all this will require the EU treaties themselves to be opened up and tinkered about with, including the removal of some national vetoes in certain policy areas. As ever, more Europe is always the answer. And EU MEPs on the Constitutional Affairs Committee have put forward proposals along these lines to, as they call it, strengthen EU capacity to act, i.e. reduce nation states' capacity to act, because that will be the outcome. More competencies will be pushed upwards to Brussels, the reverse of devolution. And the MEPs are looking to expand the powers of the EU Parliament, while reducing the powers of individual member states' domestic ministers within the EU Council. This would mean that many more votes in the EU Council would be decided by qualified majority voting, meaning no one state could just veto a proposal because it damaged their country's economy, for example. Member states would become more like local councils as a result. Further, the EU Parliament want the power to initiate legislation, something it presently is unable to do. Parliament also wants to wrest the power to nominate EU Commission presidents away from the Council and have that power for themselves. And then the Council would have to vote to OK the EU Parliament decision, a complete reversal of the current position. And now here's the interesting one, quoting europal.europa.eu. The draft report asks for the introduction of a mechanism for EU-wide referendums on matters relevant to the Union's actions and policies, including the approval of the treaty reform proposals at hand, and enhance the existing participatory mechanisms. EU-wide referendums. In the past, that would have been considered as a big no-no. So what's caused this change of minds? Well, me being a cynic, I would suspect that these new referenda would be used judiciously to push through EU-wide policies over the heads of national governments. If the majority of the EU citizenry want that, then it must be made law. You know, that sort of thing. Something along the lines of, are you in favour of the wealthier EU nations putting more money into the EU pot? And considering the number of net receivers of EU money, that might get a resounding yes. And countries like Germany and the Netherlands might not be best pleased at that. But how, as good Europeans, could they refuse? And how about a referendum on an EU army funded by the richer EU states to defend the bloc? In fact, the EU could end up with its own version of the Barnett formula. Now, the big message here is that the EU is morphing towards an ever more Brussels-centric organisation, and sovereign power is being leached away from the member states and their governments. Now, there will be those that argue that any country that doesn't like it can just trigger Article 50 and leave, so they haven't lost their sovereignty. That's assuming that there will be an Article 50 once the treaties have been rewritten. And for those EU member states in the Eurozone, how do they extract themselves from that? How does exercising their sovereignty become a reality? It was relatively easy for the UK to leave because we had the pound sterling. Had we been inside the Eurozone at the time of Brexit, it would have been huge magnitudes harder. And when future UK voters look in at the newly centralised EU and see how little power its member states have, I would reckon they would balk at the reality of joining such a setup. As an example, those MEPs want to see Brussels hold exclusive EU competence for the environment and biodiversity. No backsliding on net zero for the likes of Germany then. And they also want to see Brussels handed shared competence over such matters as health, civil protection, industry and education. Do you detect mission creep at work here? Those MEPs also have proposals on foreign security and defence policy, including something that Nick Clegg never saw coming: a defence union with military capacity. They want taxation measures to be decided by QMV with no vetoes, and an integrated European, by which I think they mean EU, energy union, something that would require Brussels to take charge of. And all of this will be voted on by all MEPs during the 20th to the 23rd of November plenary session. And another EU Parliament committee, the Civil Liberties Committee, says a well-functioning European Border and Coast Guard agency can help member states manage the EU's external borders. So they want more powers given to Frontex, and for it to invest in search and rescue assets. Possibly an attempt to stop member states like Italy and Greece from blocking the migrant boats coming across the Med, perhaps. Frontex will presumably just find them and tow them in, whatever the member state government wants. Not sure the MEPs on that particular committee are reading the room accurately quite yet, especially as the EU Commission is drawing up new regulations to upgrade their immigration system. Firstly, by getting rid of the Dublin Accord that rejoiners are always harping on about. The Dublin Accord forced us to take more people in than we sent back, so it was always a disaster for the UK. But now the EU wants rid of it too. They want a system where, music to our ears, anyone claiming asylum in the EU must, after the regs come into force, do so in their first country of arrival, as well as putting in place procedures that deter people travelling about the EU looking for the best asylum deal they can get or the best port they can get to the UK. But in return, each EU member state will have to start by taking in 30,000 people a year, or pay €20,000 for each one they don't take, so someone else can look after them. And that, sadly, could well end up making Keir Starmer look good for doing zilch in a couple of years' time. Anyway, you can see that the EU is making considerable changes away from the bloc it was when we voted to leave it in 2016. Anyone trying to tell you we can go back to the way it was before we left the EU is lying. There would be no Thatcher rebate. We would be tied into taking a set number of refugees. We would be forced to ditch the pound for the euro, as well as join the Schengen area and hand over our armed forces and intelligence services to Brussels. And once the people hoist all that in, rejoin is toast.